Chapter 1. Liz, a mute woman with 2 moles on her face, returns home after delivering her daughter's baby. She goes about her daily routine but notices her husband, Eli, teaching their son to shoot. She expresses her dissatisfaction, but Eli insists the boy needs to learn, and it's better to do it at home than in the backyard with his friends. In response, her son reminds her that she is not his real mother. The locals gather for a church service, and Liz comes with her family. There is a new pastor in the village. When he begins his sermon, Liz freezes with fear upon seeing the scar on his face and throat. After the sermon, Liz tries to slip away unnoticed to avoid facing the pastor. However, her plans are thwarted when one of the parishioners goes into labor. The woman is carried into the church, expelling all the men, including the pastor. The birth is complicated, and the child does not survive. When her husband tries to comfort her, Liz accuses the pastor of touching her belly. The rumors spread quickly, and neighbors even refuse to greet each other. At night, a drunken farmer, whose child did not survive, comes to their house. He shoots through the windows, blaming Liz for the tragedy. Eli tries to calm him down, but he demands revenge. The situation is saved by the pastor, who convinces the farmer to go back home. However, Liz is more afraid of the pastor than the angry man, and asks Eli not to let him into the house. Eli does not understand her fears, but eventually agrees that they need to leave. In the morning, they find dead sheep in the barn. Eli decides that it is the work of the farmer and goes to him with a gun, but the farmer and his wife have already left the village. Meanwhile, Liz is cleaning up the dead sheep and is locked in the barn. She sees the pastor talking to her daughter and then leading her away. After escaping, Liz faints. When she returns home, she tells her husband that the pastor has taken her daughter, but the girl is soon found. In the evening, she confesses that the priest told her the truth. Her mother is a murderer, and the pastor has come to take her with him. At night, Liz takes a horse and goes to the church, taking a knife. In the priest's bed, she finds her daughter's favorite doll and realizes that she has been deceived. At this time, the pastor breaks into their house with a knife. Waking up to the noise, Eli takes his gun and goes to check, but is stabbed. The priest finishes him off, leaving Liz with instructions to take the children to their grandfather. The pastor sets the house on fire, and Liz and the children escape into the night in a carriage. The pastor takes the lost doll and watches the flames. Chapter 2. An exhausted teenage girl wanders in the desert. Having lost consciousness, she regains consciousness in the wagon of the migrants who picked her up on the way. After examining the passenger, the owner of the family decides to sell her to Frank, the owner of a women's institution. There, the girl, who calls herself Joanna, witnesses a scene that will soon involve her. One of the customers forces Joanna to watch the process. Enraged by her resistance, he starts beating the woman and then tries to force Joe to make love to him. In a fit of rage, she grabs a revolver and shoots him in the back. The beaten service worker is laid out on the square as a warning to others. In accordance with the current legislation, the owner of the institution for women explains that clients cannot be insulted. During this conversation, 2 round moles are visible on the girl's neck. As she grows older, Joanna, who now looks like the mute midwife Liz, fully works her way through her stay at the institution for women. In the midst of the tense atmosphere, her friend bursts into the room to tell her that Frank has started a shootout. A crowd had gathered outside, as there was little entertainment at the time, and the duel between the 2 men attracted attention. Frank's opponent is an elderly man who blames him for the death of his daughter. He swears that he will take revenge for all the daughters of the world. The crowd watches as Frank wins the duel, albeit in an unfair way. The local sheriff turns a blind eye because he can't take any chances. Resting on the shore of the lake, Joanna and her friend Elizabeth dream of escape and freedom. The turning point is an incident with an important client. Elizabeth bites his tongue, and Frank severely punishes her. The angry customers demanded that the girl be eliminated, but in order not to lose his employee, Frank cut out her tongue in front of the crowd. After that, the friends learn sign language. Elizabeth promises to eliminate Frank before she escapes. Her plan involves marrying a widower man whom a marriage agency has found for her. She persuades Joanna to come to her later, pretending to be her sister. On the last night, a wealthy man buys out the entire establishment. Frank gathers the employees to present the goods. The mystery customer turns out to be a priest, now scarless. Joanna recognizes him, and fear appears on her face. To avoid recognition, she puts on a mask, but the pastor still recognizes her by her moles. Once alone with Joanna, the priest admits that he has been looking for her for a long time. He is ready to forgive her for her past sins, but the girl threatens to eliminate him. The furious priest begins to beat her, but Elizabeth bursts into the room and stabs him, leaving a scar on his face. The priest pulls out the knife and eliminates Elizabeth, but Joanna manages to grab the weapon and stab her several more times. Realizing the consequences, Joanna takes the priest's gold and sets the room on fire to destroy the evidence. She goes to the doctor to have her tongue removed, but he refuses, so she performs the operation herself. Joanna runs away to a farmer and introduces herself as Elizabeth. The third chapter. The corpse of a man lies on the prairie. Another, seriously wounded, crawls away, leaving a bloody trail. Another man catches up with him, pointing a gun, but instead of a shot, there is a rumble of thunder. Young Joanna is praying in her room. The pastor watches her and then goes to his wife's bedroom to express his displeasure at her unwillingness to fulfill her marital duties. During the sermon, the priest convinces the residents by inciting religious fanaticism. It turns out that everyone has seen divine visions except his wife, which casts a shadow over his authority. At night, Joanna wakes up because of her womanhood. At the same moment, she witnesses the pastor's evil tendencies. He takes his wife to the barn, where he whips her until she is wounded. In the morning, the mother notices that the girl is secretly washing blood from her nightgown. She explains to the child that this is normal because she has become an adult. Later, while Joanna is taking a bath, the Reverend comes into the room and hints that now that she is an adult, her responsibilities will be adult as well. Among them is taking care of the pigs. While feeding them, the girl notices two wounded men on the same horse. They turn out to be survivors. After a quarrel over gold, they lose consciousness, and the girl drags them to the barn, takes off the saddle, and drives the horse away so that no one notices them. With a knife, she removes the bullets from their wounds, but instead of gratitude, she receives obscene hints from one of the men. The other introduces himself as Emile and thanks her for her help. The Reverend tells Joan that adult women have responsibilities that little girls cannot do. One of these duties is to bathe the head of the family. Realizing that his mind is clouded, the wife goes to bed with him in the evening, but the man refrains from intimacy. Later, the pastor spies on her while she is changing her clothes. Catching him, his wife hints that his thoughts are bad. However, he quotes from memory a passage that blesses such an activity and begins the public punishment. Meanwhile, the wounded criminals are at odds with each other. One of them strangles his partner with a rope right in the toilet, while the girl watches indifferently. Then they feed the pigs together. At this time, the Reverend puts an iron mask of shame on his wife for daring to contradict him. This becomes the last straw for the woman, and she leaves this world right during the sermon. The man blames himself for not being able to reason with her. Joan makes her way to the barn where the wounded criminal is and tries to take off her dress. But the guy stops her because, unlike the Reverend, he sees her as a child. In the morning, the pastor takes his daughter to the church to marry her. But suddenly, man appears in the doorway, shining like a saving angel, and points a gun at the pastor's head. However, this becomes a big mistake. The Reverend deftly intercepts the weapon and shoots the unfortunate savior in the head. He then drags his daughter into the house and does many bad things to raise her. The next morning, the girl runs away from home in her nightgown. The last fourth chapter of Retribution begins. In the snowy mountains, Joanna, Liz, and her daughter are traveling by wagon, with Liz's stepson as their driver. In a snowstorm, the boy drops his rifle and goes to pick it up. Suddenly, a shot is heard and he falls down. The boy slowly loses consciousness in front of Liz. He was shot by the Reverend with a rifle with an optical sight that allows him to see through the snowstorm. After reaching her father-in-law's house, Liz, who has lost half of her family in a few days, prepares for the final battle. She loads her weapon, sitting on the porch, and waits for her pursuer. He appears, unafraid to be shot from such a long distance. He proclaims that her daughter will pay for her sins. Terrified, Liz runs to the house and finds her father-in-law, who is already in the other world. She and her daughter climb through the window, but the pastor is already in the house. He grabs them and ties them up. The priest beats his granddaughter in front of Liz. The woman manages to free herself by dislocating her arms. She throws a lamp at the enemy, and he is engulfed in flames. To make sure it's over, she shoots him with a rifle. In the next scene, Liz is building a house on the riverbank. A raft with police floats down the river. They have come for her. Elizabeth is wanted for the murder of Frank without a word. This is exactly what her friend did before leaving the pastor with a scar. The sheriff adds to the irony when he remarks that she should have at least changed her name. The woman in chains is taken back to town on a raft. She takes one last look at her daughter and jumps into the water. The weight of the shackles pulls her to the bottom. They try to stop the escape attempts with warning shots, but the bullets do not penetrate the water. Liz dies with a smile on her face. In the final scene, her grown daughter stands on the same bank with her daughter and remembers how strong her mother was. My God, she jumped into the water only when she had overcome all her problems and found happiness.